But it's good that you're as prepared as you can be, and hopefully, you all will make it through it without a whole lot of hassle. Or hopefully the weather changes before then. You never know.
Very true. Either way, I'm hopeful that we won't lose power this time.
Right, right. We are finally coming out of the snow here. It is still very, very cold. It is, I think, currently 15 degrees outside, um,
Oh.
which is very, very low. It's usually not this cold, but we're surviving. We're making it. All the snow is melting, so we don't have a lot of a hassle of doing that. I'm kind of sad that the kids didn't get to play out in the snow as much as they usually do during the winter time. Because in our move, we moved from a place that had snow at least once or twice a year to a place that really doesn't ever see snow except for this random event that we had this year. So it's been an interesting adjustment.
Yeah, I think the last time it snowed in Houston was 2021. And
Oh, wow.
the first time in recorded history, if I remember right, was in 2004. I was in like ninth grade and we actually had snow, and it was just completely unheard of up until that point.
That's wild that that was the first time ever. And I think that that also speaks a lot to all of these weather changes that we've been seeing over the last like 30 years in our history. Things have just been kind of getting a little wild, a little crazy. And, I remember Lane, which I'm sure she'll speak on this when she comes in for roundtable, but I was the other day she mentioned about how Colorado actually isn't getting enough snow. It's like it's coming further south, which is very strange.
Mm. It always reminds me of that movie. What was it? A Day After Tomorrow? The Day After Tomorrow? Was that the one?
Yes, the one with I think it was John Cusack.
Yeah, there's two of them that I always get mixed up. I think one of them was like 2012 or something.
Yeah.
Um, two very similar like themes.
Oh yeah, end of the world dystopian dysfunction due to unruly weather patterns, the apocalyptic weather events. And hopefully we'll return to some type of normative soon, because they're just kind of going wild. And it's a lot to adjust to, like you said, with Houston not having any salt, not being able to treat the roads. That poses a lot of danger and a lot of concern.
Yeah, a lot of people always just get baffled by it. And they're like, why is it not a big deal? And, they grew up in the North. And so they have a lot of um, infrastructure for this type of weather, but they forget we do not. Our houses aren't built to sustain that type of weather. We don't have the equipment nor the road infrastructure for it. So it is a mini apocalyptic event when it happens, and everything is supposed to just shut down.
Oh yeah, it is pretty bonkers. Here kind of the same thing happens. Um, they don't actually like have salt for their roads. They have a little bit just in case. And then that's used downtown, but the rest of us were just kind of stuck inside the house, which was kind of nice. I didn't have to go anywhere and I enjoyed that personally. It's
Yeah, I
always
mean,
fun for me.
it'll be fine as long as we don't lose power. We will be okay.
Yes, yes, absolutely. Well, I am glad that you are prepared for it, and I'm excited to jump into today's topic. This has been something really, really large for me over the last week, and the ideas of communication, how they change for us as we grow and heal and begin to step into our power and control. And I'm so excited to jump into this. Again, we're going to be talking about miscommunication, and the fifth chakra, the throat chakra. Before we dive in fully, I do want to remind people that we are making the transition, the switch over to YouTube lives. You'll still be able to see our lives for a good long while on Facebook, but we are making the transition over to YouTube. So if you haven't, follow us, like, and subscribe. Feel free to comment on our videos. We love to have people jump into the conversations. We want to hear your stories. We want to know you and share your thoughts and ideas on what we're talking about live on our program as well. So for those of you who haven't done that, the link will be in the show notes and in the comments everywhere that you'll see this. But yeah, let's dive in. Let's talk about some miscommunication. Where do you stand on how the throat chakra shows up in miscommunication?
You know, throat chakra, a lot of people think it is communication, but it's also connection. So it's everything in how we show up and express ourselves, from our actions to our words, to how we say those words, to our body language, to our attire, and how we dress. But it's at the root of communication, it's always connection. That's the whole point, right? Otherwise, why would you bother saying anything?
Oh yeah, exactly. You know, I feel like communication is something that we generalize into just speech. But like you said, communication can be so much larger than that. Um, and having that throat chakra open, it allows us to do so much more in conjoining what we believe to be our own personal truth with the truths and how it shows up in the world around us. Um, it's so interesting also when we start to look at the way that we want that connective tissue, that energetic tissue between us and our relationships or the environment that we're working in. For those of us who are witchy and do like very natural work, maybe out in the woods or out in a field, all of this has a much larger depth than what we generalize it as just that voice.
Absolutely. And, connections are so much deeper than words. It's being able to, reach in and relate to someone else's experience. And there is this very deep, energetic, emotional exchange. Because, I mean, you can have a conversation with a stranger or a conversation with an intimate partner and just feel like there's nothing there, right? You might as well be talking to a brick wall. And a lot of what I see when it comes to miscommunication is we don't know how to connect in a way that the other person knows how to receive.
Oh, yes, absolutely. I often see this in neurodivergent or what I call neurospicy relationships and the way that neurospicy people want to express themselves to the world around them or how they're feeling their expression is being received by those relationships. Um, and I'm so much reminded of, and this was something that I lived with also, but I'm reminded of the child archetype who is always told uh to be quieter, that they're being too loud or that they're talking too much.
Hmm.
And that was something that I very much was affected by. Now, I also fully understand that there are limitations. Like, I am a parent and I have a child who is ADHD, but that's where the semantics of language comes into play because there are other things that we can say or there are reassuring things that we can put in there that don't inhibit the relationship and instead harbor this understanding of, okay, maybe mom's a little overwhelmed right now, and I shouldn't be like going on and on about this Lego that I just built uh for 3 hours. But mom does want to hear me and she loves what I'm building. And there's different ways that we can approach that and show up for the other people in our lives just by having deeper interest in their identification as a person. If those
Absolutely.
words English right. I hope they did.
Oh, oh yeah, absolutely. Like I literally had this conversation with my daughter. So I took her grocery shopping with me yesterday as we prepared for the winter storm, and many other people were there. And she used the word scary, but I think she was looking for the word overwhelming, um, because there was just people everywhere, right? And it was just really busy and lots of movement. And I kind of used that as a moment to connect with her. And I'm like, you know how sometimes when your show's really loud and I tell you to turn it down, or even if it's not loud, and I'm just like, I can't listen to that. Please get headphones, you know. And kind of like tied back other like scenarios where I'm overwhelmed and it's just too much sound. I was like, that's how mom feels in those situations. It's not that, you know, you're an inconvenience or what you have to say is. It's just that I cannot take any more stimulus coming in, um, and process it and function. I need a moment.
Oh yeah, or with Silas, I love my son so very deeply. He is absolutely phenomenal. He makes these games on his laptop and he puts them out for other people to use in this very beautiful creative space that MIT has made called Scratch. It's very cool. If you've never heard of it, I highly recommend it. I think it's mit.scratch.edu. I'll put that link in the comments too, just in case anybody's kids are interested. But he codes these games and he wants people to play them. There are people who play them, there are people who follow him. He has connections within this area, but then he wants to come and tell me every single detail that he's put into this game. And child, I love you. I love everything that you're creating. I think it is absolutely fantastic. I am a little busy sometimes when he tries to come and talk to me and he's like, "Hey mom, I want to tell you about the way that I coded this." And my brain can't handle coding. It was
Mm.
not made for coding. And so I will let him explain for a bit and we will go into it and I will let him finish that thought. But then he'll try to immediately move into the next one. And I'm like, "Hey, whoa, 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 whoa. I'm still busy. I'm still doing something. I love you. I love what you're creating. I think it's fantastic. I think you should go work on it some more and then come back and tell me at a time when I am not so busy. And maybe I can just look at it with you and take it to a different level. That way, maybe I can understand it better and I can actually connect with you instead of you just spewing out this coding mumbo jumbo that I have no idea what you're talking about."
Absolutely. I developed this habit of, you know, saying, I don't have the brain space, you know, or I don't have the space for this right now. If you need to tell me, shoot me a text and I will read it when I have the capacity to actually like understand what you were trying to tell me because it is important. But I just cannot process right now.
Right.
And that's been really effective. But, you know, the underlying theme in how we kind of like communicate with our children is we have to recognize and empathize with what they're going through and what the point of the communication is, right? And on the flip side, we also have to like take into account the context and the personal connotations assigned to different words, right? Like if somebody tells you to shut up, chances are that's going to feel a little aggressive, right? But if it's used in an exclamation of excitement, right, that completely changes the context.
Oh,
And
yes.
when it comes to communication, especially in the digital age, we don't have a lot of those cues like the body language, the facial expressions. We don't have the tone of voice. So we tend to miss these cues to understand that context and that connotation. And it ends up skewing things. And, you know, if you're distracted, you're just kind of like giving a default response and it kind of comes out a bit robotic or annoyed because you're busy doing something while you're trying to have a conversation and it throws off the context. So even if you are face to face or in person, you know, it can lead to miscommunication.
Oh, absolutely. And that's one of the reasons why like I am so careful about letting them know, having that supportive, that reassurance, that positive vocabulary when I'm trying to make make a cutoff. That sounds so bad. But sometimes we have to have that, when I'm trying to like make a segue and say, hey, I still need you to go do this while I'm doing this. I try to put that positive reinforcement and let them know that I want to hear you. I hear what you're saying. I want to hear you. I want to connect, but maybe now might not be the best time. And that also teaches them that idea of, okay, maybe I should be a little bit more observant of the time, what is happening, whether or not I walked into the room and was mom already busy. Was she already in the middle of something, which as moms we usually are. So taking a second to address your child should kind of be an automatic and say, "Hey, what's up, kid? Let's stand here and talk for a second." And evaluate also on your end as the adult what needs to be addressed, how you can show up for it and be present there for that connection. I also like how much you bring up tone. I'm going to mention something that my father used to tell me as I was a child, and just in case he listens to this, Dad, I don't hate you. Like I don't hold any animosity to this. But for a long time, it was really hard for me to. I talk a lot. I don't know if you all have gathered that by now yet, but I talk forever. I have so many thoughts. That's where Silas gets it from. I have so many thoughts. They go so fast. They're just rolling out of me. And my dad used to tell me that I had hit my vocabulary limit for the day, which is really funny. But like as an 8-year-old, you're kind of like, what? And it was actually really impactful and it made me feel like I needed to be smaller than I was. And so
Hmm.
I'm so grateful that I put that positive spin on it. And instead of saying you've hit your vocabulary limit for the day, just kind of being like, okay, I need a moment. But we'll come back to this. Like you're not cut off for the whole day. You're not too much. I love you and I love what you're giving me. Just give me a second.
So I got that. There was the quiet game, right? Where they would try to make it gamify it so that we would all be quiet. Um, I
Yeah.
got I got scolded for my tone of voice a lot because I'm very intense, especially when I'm excited about something. Or if I'm just like confused because something seems extremely obvious to me, but other people haven't put that level of thought into it, I can be very, very intense, and people will mistake that intensity for aggression or anger, even. And I always was so confused about the watch your tone. And I'm like, I'm not intending it to be any kind of way. I don't understand what you're speaking about. And, as I've gotten older, I've noticed it in others. When people communicate with this level of intensity, they're trying very hard to connect. It almost feels very pushy, um, where they're pushing that energy, that connection, that communication onto you. And it feels a little overwhelming. And people are like kind of pulling back, like, whoa, calm down. Like, what's going on? But it's not necessarily a tangible thing. It's more of a perceptual thing. Does that make sense?
Oh, that makes total sense.
And, I have clients all the time that struggle with that. And, people will think that they are being grouchy or rude or irritable when they're really just trying very hard to communicate in the best way that they know how.
Yes, yes. Me and my oldest child struggle with that a lot. And I can now understand, shout out to my other parental unit who used to tell me I was mean all the time because the way that I talk, there's a lot of power behind my voice. And it wasn't until I was like a young adult, I was in my like early 20s when I realized that my vocal presence is intimidating to people. And which is really funny because y'all, I am 4'11". I am usually a hot mess when you look at me. Like I prefer to be in like a t-shirt and sweatpants and as comfy as possible. But when my mouth opens, I take over any room that I'm in, and everyone just kind of gets quiet and is looking at me because I am much louder than everything else that's around me. I actually had to make sure that the microphone I got for this podcast wouldn't pick me up as being as loud as I actually am. Um, but because of that, and because I'm very assertive in the way that I talk, my mom always called me mean. And I thought that I was just a mean person because of how I approach things. And I look at my eldest child now, and I will tell you that there's attitude, there's level of volume, but they're not being mean. They're being assertive about what they feel and what they feel is right for the situation. Now they're 12, so they don't often know what's right for the situation, but boy, are they about it. And I can take that and say, hey, let's break down how your attitude is coming out. Let's break down how forceful this sounds. And again, I'll often reassure them and be like, look, I want you to be forceful. I want you to have this type of power behind your voice because I can see now that no one will stand in your way, nor will you let anyone walk over you. And I want that to stay around. But when you and I are talking about something you need to correct, that's not the time for you to say, I know that's not right though, Mom. And go down that route. But I can see where my mom saw it as being mean. And I think that for a long time, she just didn't have the language to meet me on the terms I needed her to meet me at.
Absolutely. And that's also, again, goes back to her own personal connotation because in the NLP, neuro-linguistic programming communication model, right, we receive stimulus and it goes through filters of delete, distort, or generalize. So either being deleted because it's deemed as erroneous and we don't process it right, we distort it to fit our perception and our expectations of what we thought was going to happen, or we will generalize it like that big hand wave, right? And those big filters are, time, space, energy, language, memories, your meta programs. Meta programs are like the 16 personality traits. Myers-Briggs, there we go, is the very common one, right? So those are the meta programs. And then your beliefs, your values, and then your attitudes. And attitudes are those learned tendencies to evaluate and judge things in a certain way. Like the likes and dislikes and how that relates to your experience.
I think this also like I'm drawn to also put this into the ideas of dialectical thinking. Do you know what I'm talking about when I say that?
Oh yeah, yeah. Where you're able to reconcile two opposing viewpoints and kind of just examine them. I don't know if I'm fully
Yes.
capturing it, but that's what my brain's spitting out.
I mean, yeah, that might be like an oversimplification, but I think that that's helpful in this particular aspect because so much of that idea is being able to look into and look past. And although we've been talking about our relationships with children in this, I'm drawn to how this relates to us and our own personal trauma because as we're talking about connecting with our children, we're also talking about what we were told as children and how we're not passing that on. And we're able to do that because of this form of thinking, this dialectical thinking, which is a fancy scientific psychological term for the fact that as adults, we're in this stage that professionals call post-formal thinking. We've gone past all of the ideas of being told what we need to do, how we need to show up. We're moving past all of these ideas of of not doing things correctly. We understand that there's a different modality that we need to apply as we come across situations here in our present. And that's where this thinking comes in. It's where we can observe it and we can say, okay, well, I don't have to respond with anger. I don't have to respond with positivity either. I'm heavily reminded of situations. Someone messaged one of the group chats earlier, and they were so upset because they got into an argument over a pentacle, whether it was pentacle versus pentagram, and that person that they were arguing with was bringing in these really radical racist and religiously biased views, which kind of blew my mind. And they were so upset. And I was like, all you can do is allow that person to have their misconstrued idea and kind of step out of that and look at yourself. How does that reflect in you? And how are you reflecting those things outwardly in your interaction with other people? So, are you putting that out to other people, or are you showing them a different idea of compassion and understanding of these two symbols without it becoming something so much more displacing? Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely.
And I feel like as adults, we heavily do that as we carry these things from our past. We carry these afflictions because it used to hurt me for a really long time. I'm actually kind of like, I get a little choked up even talking about it now, that statement that my dad used to say to me. And it hurts me now because I understand that he wasn't hurting me, but I was so hurt by it. And what my mom said, doesn't really choke me up anymore because I can stand true in my own voice. That other thing that our throat chakra is really good at doing is allowing us to stand so firmly in our truth and express who we are. And that dialectical thinking can allow us to look back and say, okay, so they weren't really trying to hurt me. I'm reminded again of two things can be true at the same time. I was hurt, but that was not their intention. And I can now move forward and not do that to the people around me.
Absolutely. One of the things that I learned post divorce was I tend to interpret things in many different ways, and sometimes I don't know which direction someone meant it, right? So I would base it off of past behaviors um, to kind of figure out what direction they went with that. And it bit me one day when I was interacting with my ex, and I had misinterpreted what he said to be very like rude, basically. I don't even remember to this day like what it was that he said, but like I thought it was a shot at me. And my response was accordingly. And it just kind of like threw him off that I responded in such a way, like he was confused. And it was seeing his reaction that kind of made me was like, wait a minute, what did you mean? And it was that moment that I decided to always, 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 instead of making assumptions, to just ask for clarification. And, if they did mean it in a harsh way, it kind of puts them on the spot and they have to own up to it.
They absolutely do. They absolutely do. I am reminded of a time where my husband was very, very open and honest with me, and he still is, but he chooses his words very carefully because, as you can kind of see, I'm very affected by word choice. And it wasn't until I it was right before I turned 30 that I really understood that word choice had to be so specific in order for it to convey what you actually want it to mean. And we had a big conversation at a time where he brought up that he was thinking about what life would have been like had he not met me and had to like do all this for like the kids and stuff. But he used the word regret.
Mm.
He didn't use the word regret as in I regret this. He used it as in I mean, the question crossed my mind, like, do I regret this? And the answer was no. Like there were so many things that, yeah, we can always make different decisions. We can always have different outcomes. There's so much of a difference between wondering, and we talk about this a lot about grieving lives that you can't live or that you could have lived and you made a different choice. Um, that doesn't mean that that person regrets it. But hearing that word and I at the time I was going through some heavy anxiety. I was seeing a therapist. I was in a really tough emotional spot, and that like broke me.
Mm.
And which we're totally fine. That's not, even a thing. And that was a few years ago at this point already. But that just conveys the importance of really getting down to the bottom of what you mean. I also want to look at, so we have some comments in our YouTube live. This person says that energy has to go somewhere, and oftentimes it does go into volume when we're thinking about like enhancing manifestation and when we're talking about putting things into the universe, using our voice to do that. That often relates physically as increasing in volume.
Mhm.
Similar to you, when I'm excited, I get really loud. My husband will just like make this motion with his hand of like just pushing things down to tell me that I am really loud. And I'm like, afterwards, I can tell I've been like reverberating through the room and I'm way over what a boundary should be. And he'll be just like, just tone it down a little bit. Um, and yeah, they also say that if you're secure in your beliefs, you can entertain an idea without believing in it. And I think that is going back to the dialectical thinking and being able to see all of the different sides of things. But we still need to hold the other person accountable for the way that we're talking. Similarly to what you were saying, I think you said it was with your ex and how you two communicated. There still needs to be this understanding.
Yeah, but I mean, one of the things that I said in the army constantly was words mean things, but just because it means one thing to me does not mean it means the same thing to you. It was a hard lesson in leadership and communication for me. But in the army, we're also always taught when you receive an order to give feedback, right? Where you're basically repeating back in your own words what you were instructed upon, right? And that's something to this day I still teach clients because it is such a powerful tool. It tells people, hey, I heard you. I understood what you were trying to say. And it gives the opportunity to clear up miscommunications too.
Oh, absolutely. I think that that idea of feedback is so powerful. That's actually one of the things I've started implementing with my kids and with homeschool. And we actually do it first thing in the morning. We'll do it at between 9 and 9:30. We do a sit down time before we start schoolwork, and they have a space to air their questions, comments, and grievances. They're
Mhm.
allowed to complain. They're allowed to request something different. And we'll sit there and we'll go through it. That doesn't always end up the way that they want it to, because I guarantee you, my children more often than not are like, I don't want to do school today. And my answer is, well, that's not one of the options. I'm sorry, friends. Maybe school can look a little different. Like today, we actually spent the morning watching the inauguration, which counts towards their government and social sciences. And then once we get done recording today, we're going to make popcorn and beans and cornbread, and we're going to play a D&D one shot, which will help them with their creative thinking, their problem solving skills, and some good old math, basic math, but some good old math. And so they don't always get the answer that they want, but they're heard. They have a space for their voice. Maybe we can make some changes to make something align more to what they're feeling. And sometimes that has even grown them to have a larger voice for themselves when they're really trying to express, hey, I really don't like how I'm learning this. I don't like how this is showing up for me. Maybe we can tweak it. Maybe we can alter it and make it more fitting to me to where I can understand it. And it is so helpful for them to feel heard, and it gives them this sense of empowerment also.
Absolutely. And, we we model behavior for other people, and over time they'll pick it up. So as we're doing it for our kids or our significant others or our friends, they're going to start to pick up those pieces and um, start to kind of reciprocate that. So giving other people that space and that feedback, letting them know that you hear them, they're going to in turn over time start to adjust accordingly and reciprocate that. Not in all cases, obviously. There are certain cases where that's just never going to happen, and that's where boundaries come in. But in most cases, especially in close relationships, like family environments, right? Shared households, you'll see that eventually start to adapt where, the wife doesn't feel heard. So she starts to implement these things and how she interacts and communicates with her family, and then in turn, over time, that family will kind of start to pick up on it and start to feed it and reciprocate back.
Oh yes, absolutely. And by the way, it's Kelly commenting on our YouTube, by the way. And Kelly says everyone learns differently. Though many try to teach a fish how to climb a tree, and then base an entire educational process on that one example. I agree with you on this. That almost reaches into a whole other category, which I'm sure we will get to at some point. But and it does have a lot to do with miscommunication. When we look at psychology, a lot of psychology was based on the communication of a very restrictive group of people who didn't open up to the other ideas of people. I'm reminded so much of the difference between Western and Eastern philosophy, which goes within the ideas of psychology, mostly because Eastern philosophy plays into all of the psychology there, and Western psychology is like, we don't do philosophy at all here. I don't know what you're talking about. And seeing that stark difference, and now we have a whole group of psychological philosophizing pioneers that are trying to combine the two over here so that way maybe we can have a full understanding of self, and we can have this full understanding of why we are the way that we are, and can pass these traits on to the other ones. Like Ashley was just saying, giving everyone the opportunity to speak for themselves and hold these things up for themselves and change the way that maybe they're interacting with a group who, what's the word I'm looking for? With whoever is in charge. That's not the words I'm looking for, but I think you understand what I mean. But listening to that and then having that feedback and having them understand different ways to work with you, all of this is a really new concept in Western idea.
So I like that you bring up philosophy because one of my favorite things about philosophy and their approach is they always start by defining terms. And I feel like, especially for important conversations, that defining your terms um, is so, so helpful to help kind of clear out any room for miscommunication, especially because English itself is like a modge podge of so many different freaking languages that it can be very confusing because one word can have like five different meanings.
Oh yeah, as a person who homeschools, English is the worst language.
I feel bad for my daughter. She struggles with reading and like I'm like, it doesn't make sense. I know, especially when it comes to spelling. I'm not the one to teach teach you this. I cannot help. I just get it. I think I've memorized it. I don't know that there was a rule that I followed that helped me.
Well, part of it is the dialective thinking, actually. I recently learned that in the class that I'm taking, is that when we're in this post-formal idea, this is only something that we can gain as adults, and children just they don't have it.
Hmm. Yeah,
Anyways, I apologize. I interrupted you.
it's okay. It just miscommunication can impact so much, and it's so many different directions that you could go with just this one topic. But I think one of the biggest things is being as clear and concise as possible, defining your terms and what it means to you to make sure that it means the same thing to the other person. Like in relationships, one person might have a certain idea about what cheating entails, while the other one has a much more rigid idea. It could be something as simply as messaging other girls in a flirtatious way, and that's cheating. Whereas the other partner might think that it involves actual physical encounters. So defining your
Yes.
terms can clear up so many things, and it helps with setting those boundaries too.
Yes. I'm glad that you brought up this idea of how it shows up in relationships as like what constitutes cheating. That was another conversation that I had with my husband when we first met. Like I had gone through a relationship where I attempted to define boundaries and my boundaries were just totally disrespected. Like it wasn't even a thing of I did not communicate them well, but because they were totally disrespected, I did reflect on what my needs, what my boundaries and what my boundaries were defined as. And that does all come down to communication. And we talk about boundaries so much because they're so important at every single stage of healing. But communicating your boundaries is a different idea than setting them in your head for yourself. Communicating them to another person is just as important. And giving that definition to what's okay and what's not okay is also very big. Those first few communications with my now husband it involved things of like, okay, have you ever thought of, the ideas of like polyamory versus monogamy? Which one are you into? Which one works for you in your life? And we would continue to have discussions like this, this is how I feel about X, Y, and Z. How do you feel about X, Y, and Z? And then that would lead us into more conversations and defining all of these things really put us on this narrow path of, okay, this is who I want to be with. This is where I want to be. There's a lot of romance there too. Don't just like think this is all logistical.
Mm.
But there was a lot of logistics and language that went into it for us to make sure that we were making the right decisions and we weren't just caught off guard by something the other one was going to do or say.
Absolutely. And I think that all relationships can benefit from those deep, meaningful conversations because it's so easy to get caught up in this small talk. I was reading earlier on Reddit about the loneliness epidemic, right? And as I'm thinking about it and I'm reading these comments, like it's we have all these superficial relationships, but we're not actually connecting. And we're not being vulnerable. We're not being open. We're not allowing people into our inner home, right? It's like we're trying to have a conversation with someone through the Ring doorbell camera, okay? Not very
Right?
effective when it comes to, building relationships. And communication is part of that. And it involves saying more than just a short greeting at the door.
Oh yeah, I'm
You gotta
reminded
invite
of
them in, man.
well, I'm reminded of and this is slightly off topic, but it makes sense for the language thing. I'm reminded of the myths of the vampire and how vampires can't come in unless you invite them in.
Ah, yeah.
You have to invite them in. And that's energy vampires too, friends.
Hmm.
You have to invite them in. And that's such a language thing. They can, and there's so many memes and so many jokes about it. And I love it because it's so funny. Um, and oftentimes they'll disguise it as like, okay, my favorite example is from The Lost Boys because it's a spoiler alert for those who haven't seen the movie that was made in the 1980s. The father is the head vampire of like Kiefer Sutherland and the other boys, and he's dating the mom, who's the mom of like Corey Haim and the older brother that is turning into a vampire, and he starts dating her, and that's how he gets her to invite him into their house, is because she has him over for dinner to meet her children. And that took a dark turn, but that's also important for communication. Like, communication is that important. That is also why you should have this awareness on what's coming out of that throat chakra, how you're standing in your personal strength and setting those boundaries, having those hard conversations, and coming to these conclusions with solid connection before you begin to make larger decisions.
Absolutely. Um, if you struggle with communicating, um, and you tend to fall on the more people pleasing, placating, passive side, one of the things that I love to have clients do is I print out this like spectrum, if you will, of different communication styles. And it goes all the way from submissive, dismissive to threatening. And I have them just pick one statement, right? And then I have them like reword it in different tones, right? And I mean, this is not a very serious statement. Like it can be something as simple as, please put this cup in the sink. And going from threatening to, you better put this cup in the sink or I swear, to the submissive, dismissive, and playing with those ideas where you're kind of like tap dancing around it, where you're not really asking them to do the thing. And this kind of helps you kind of understand different communication styles, right? In playing with it in this way and going through these different styles and methods of communicating, so that when you need to be assertive, you can be. When you need to be a bit more empathetic while being assertive, you know exactly how to do that. But just consistently playing with how you communicate and changing it up, and you'll be able to start to see the differences between those two. And it's very, very nuanced, and it's very much about the perception than it is about the tangible. It has to be worded this way, and your tone of voice and your inflections have to be this way, right? It's so nuanced. And the more you play around with it, and you make a game of it with your family or your friends, even, the easier it gets to be able to hit the right tone and the right style based off of the context that you need.
Yes. Yes. I'm reminded of and we're coming up on our hour, so I'll say this and I'll say it as quickly as I can, and then we'll finish this out and then head over to the round table with Lane. But I'm reminded of so there's a lot of moments that I have with my eldest child who is very emotional. They're very emotionally driven, and oftentimes again, I'm really loud. And I can come across as kind of aggressive when I'm assertive. And so I'll sit down with them and I'll give them a big hug. And while I'm hugging them, we'll just sit there and I'll go over things and I'll repeat things in a very loving, caring tone to let them remember that sometimes I just need to be loud because maybe they're not listening. Maybe they're being a little bit of that forceful energy that wants to push back and have a little bit of rebellious anarchy towards me. Um, and I'll sit back and I'll hug him, and we use a very specific language when we're being playful and having loving times. And I'll hold them and be like, hey, I love you. I'll ask them that. I don't tell them that. I'll ask them, hey, I love you. Um, are you aware of the responsibility of this? And I'll ask them very direct questions. I find that a really hard thing for some adults to do. Ask your children directly. One of the big cognitive steps of between the ages of like 5 and I think it's like 8, and then 8 going upward becomes a little bit different as well. But in those two different types of cognitive spans, our children are exploring their thoughts and their language, but they're still very logically driven. And so what you say, kind of going back to what my dad said to me, I hit my vocabulary limit for the day, or my mom would call me mean. I'm taking that very literally at that age. I'm logically putting that into my brain. So you can use metaphors and inferences to teach them things, but when you need to reassure them, try to use very direct language and say, hey, I love you. What part of this is responsibility? How could I have done better? How could you have done better? And then at the end of it, seal it with like something adorable that makes them laugh or like makes them chase you around the house and become totally goofy. So that way they can understand that that logic also comes with love and compassion and playfulness with the people you're in relationships with.
I really like that.
I call them my little turds.
Mhm.
And I will actually ask them at the end of it, I'm like, are you still a turd? And they'll be like, they'll say yes, and then they'll try to chase me around and tickle me. But yeah, I think it's important for us to remember that about kids. They're taking things very seriously because they're still trying to understand the world around them. And when we think of children, we think of these creatures of play and adaptation. And part of that adaptation is learning what they should be taking seriously and what they shouldn't be taking seriously. And they really don't understand that fully yet.
They are not little adults with adult brains.
Correct. Correct. They're little humans, but they're not little adults. They can't do those things because that is exactly what their brain is trying to do. If you wanted people to take away one big takeaway from today's episode, what would it be?
I think one of the things that I would love for people to carry forward into the week, since it is Monday, is to look for opportunities to have deeper connection through communication. Instead of just going with the hey, how are you? And small remarks on the weather, look for opportunities where you can deepen the conversation and deepen the connection in turn.
Yes, yes, this is something I'm also working on. It can be kind of hard in this fast-paced social world. Um, I also want to give a challenge for the week. I want to challenge people to choose one word that they need to take out of their lexicon and replace it with the word that they actually mean.
Hmm.
And that's a hard one because most of us, again, in our childhood stages, we're often taught to move into those metaphorical inferences, into taking on these different roles. And as we become adults, especially in our westernized society, we have some really nasty negative words that we throw around like it's nobody's business.
I'm constantly catching myself still.
Oh yes. Yeah, I still do it too, and I will apologize and put it directly. Oftentimes I'll say it to my kids because it's usually something I vowed never to use the word bad in my house. We don't call children bad, we don't call adults bad, we don't call animals bad because there's no such thing as bad. There is only a lesson for growth and opportunity.
Absolutely. I don't like depreciation. Deprecate.
Deprecating.
Help me out. Thank you. Like when you're calling yourself, I'm so stupid or whatever, right? Whenever you make a silly mistake, like I won't say those kinds of things anymore, and I don't allow my daughter to say them.
Yes, yes. Yep, no self-deprecating thought. We don't do that. Well, talk. Thoughts are going to happen sometimes whether we want them to or not, but we don't say it out loud and we don't say it to the self.
Hmm.
Alrighty. Well, we will hop off of here and we'll hop right into the round table with Lane. Thank you all, everyone, for joining us. Thank you, Kelly, for all of your wonderful comments. I'm excited that we're moving over to YouTube. It's a brand new adventure and platform for us to play with. So thank you all for joining us on our journey, and we'll see you in just a few minutes.